Seize her!
The command echoed through the royal ballroom. Hundreds of guests froze. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead. Noblemen stepped back. Women covered their mouths in shock. And standing at the center of the room was Evelyn Ashford. A few moments earlier, she had been announced as the future Grand Duchess. Now armed royal guards were surrounding her, her pulse hammered in her ears. Across the room, the king himself looked furious. Beside him stood the most powerful man in the kingdom. Her husband, or rather, the man she had once paid 10 silver coins to pretend to be her husband. A stranger. A stranger who wasn't a stranger at all. The Grand Duke, the most feared man in England, and now everyone knew. The captain of the guard stepped forward. Lady Evelyn Ashford, you are accused of deceiving the crown. Gasps erupted. Evelyn's hands trembled. Not because she feared prison, not because she feared disgrace, but because she finally understood the terrible truth. Everything had started with one desperate lie, one foolish decision, one rainy night. And now the entire kingdom was paying attention. How'd she gotten here? Let's go back. 3 months earlier, Evelyn Ashford hated the sound of wedding bells, not because she disliked romance, quite the opposite. As a little girl, she had dreamed about love, real love, the kind that grew slowly, the kind where two people chose each other, the kind that couldn't be purchased. Unfortunately, dreams meant very little in aristocratic society, especially when debt was involved. You're marrying Lord Hawthorne. Her stepfather delivered the announcement without looking up from his ledger. Evelyn stared at him. What? You heard me. No. The word slipped out before she could stop it. Her stepfather finally looked up. His eyes were cold, calculating, the eyes of a businessman, not a father. You don't have a choice. Of course I do. No, Evelyn, you don't. He closed the ledger. The estate is drowning. The statement wasn't entirely false. The Ashford family had been struggling for years. Poor investments, failed harvests, mounting debts. But Evelyn knew something her stepfather never admitted. Many of those debts were his fault. His gambling, his greed, his endless pursuit of status. And now he had found a solution. Sell his stepdaughter, Lord Hawthorne, 48 years old, twice widowed, known throughout the county for his temper and his cruelty. Even the servants whispered stories. Broken furniture, terrified maids, bruises hidden beneath sleeves. Evelyn felt sick. I'm not marrying him. Her stepfather leaned back. You will. No. His hand slammed against the desk. The sound made her flinch. For a moment neither spoke. Then he smiled, and somehow that was worse. If you refuse, every servant loses their position. Evelyn froze. He continued. The estate collapses. Another pause. Families starve. And there it was, the trap, the guilt, the burden. Not just her future, everyone's future. It was a tactic many people still recognize today. Manipulation disguised as responsibility, making one person feel accountable for everyone else's suffering. Evelyn left the room shaking. By midnight, she had made a decision. She would run. The rain was falling hard when she slipped out through the servants' entrance. No luggage, no farewell letter, no destination, only freedom. At least that was the plan. Unfortunately, freedom is expensive. And Evelyn possessed exactly 23 silver coins, not enough to survive long. By dawn, she found herself in the neighboring town, cold, hungry, terrified, and completely out of ideas. That was when she saw him. The stranger sat alone inside a small tavern. Dark coat, dark hair, sharp eyes. He looked different from everyone else, not wealthier, not louder, just calm. While everyone around him drank and argued, he sat quietly observing, the way a wolf might observe sheep. Evelyn didn't know why she approached him. Maybe desperation, maybe instinct, maybe fate. She sat across from him. He raised an eyebrow. Can I help you? His voice was low, controlled. She swallowed. This was insane, absolutely insane. Yet the words came out anyway. Would you marry me? The stranger blinked. Silence. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. Evelyn wanted the floor to swallow her whole. That wasn't the reaction I expected. Most marriage proposals aren't delivered by drenched women in taverns. Fair point. She took a breath. I don't mean permanently. His amusement deepened. That certainly improves the proposal. Evelyn glanced around, then lowered her voice. I need a husband. You need a husband, temporarily, yes. The stranger folded his arms. "I'm listening." So she told him. Not everything, but enough. The arranged marriage, the escape, the deadline, the problem. According to law, her stepfather couldn't force a marriage if she was already legally married. The stranger listened without interrupting. When she finished, he studied her carefully. Most people would have dismissed her immediately. Most people would have called her foolish. Instead, he asked one question. "Are you afraid?" The simplicity of it caught her off guard. Evelyn hesitated, then nodded, terrified. Something changed in his expression. Only briefly, almost impossible to notice. Almost. "What happens if I refuse?" She forced a smile. "I'll probably spend the rest of my life regretting this conversation." He stared at her. 1 second, 2, 3. Then he did something unexpected. He stood. "Come with me." "What? If we're getting married, we should do it properly." Evelyn nearly fell off her chair. "You're serious?" "Usually." Her heart skipped. "Why are you helping me?" The stranger reached for his coat, then looked back. "You asked. That was it. No dramatic explanation. No conditions. No negotiation. Just those 2 words. You asked." Hours later, standing before a sleepy village clerk, Evelyn became a married woman. The entire ceremony lasted less than 5 minutes. Name, signature, witness, done. The stranger signed as simply, Alexander, no title, no family name. Nothing unusual. At least that's what Evelyn believed. When they exited the building, relief flooded her body. For the first time in weeks, she could breathe. "It's over." Alexander looked at her. "No." The single word sent a chill down her spine. "What do you mean?" His gaze shifted toward the distant road. Several riders were approaching. Fast, very fast. The color drained from Evelyn's face. She recognized them instantly. Her stepfather's men. How? How had they found her? Alexander's expression hardened. For the first time since meeting him, he looked dangerous. Truly dangerous. The lead rider shouted. "There she is." Evelyn's stomach dropped. The men spurred their horses forward. 10 riders, closing fast. Too fast. She turned toward Alexander. "We need to run." But he wasn't moving. He wasn't afraid. If anything, he looked annoyed. One of the riders drew a pistol. Another raised a hunting rifle. The tavern keeper nearby immediately dove for cover. People screamed. Shops slammed their doors, and still Alexander stood perfectly still, as though 10 armed men were merely an inconvenience. Evelyn grabbed his sleeve. "Alexander," slowly, very slowly. He looked toward the approaching riders. Then something happened that made Evelyn's blood run cold. The riders saw his face, and every single one of them pulled their horses to a stop. Instantly, as if they had ridden into an invisible wall, the lead rider went pale. Another nearly fell from his saddle. A third crossed himself. Fear, pure fear, not directed at Evelyn, directed at Alexander. And for the first time since meeting him, Evelyn realized she knew absolutely nothing about the man she had just married. The riders stopped so suddenly that several horses reared backward. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke. Even the wind seemed to disappear. Evelyn looked from the armed men to Alexander, then back again. Something was terribly wrong. The lead rider's face had turned ghost white. The man had been charging toward them with absolute confidence seconds earlier. Now he looked as though he had accidentally stumbled into his own execution. Alexander sighed, not dramatically, not threateningly. Just the sigh of a man whose mourning had become inconvenient. "You've ridden a long way," he said calmly. No one answered. The silence stretched. Finally, the lead rider swallowed. My lord," Evelyn frowned. "My lord," the rider quickly dismounted. Then another followed, and another. Within seconds, all 10 men were standing beside their horses, heads lowered, eyes fixed on the ground. Evelyn blinked. She had never seen armed men surrender without a fight, especially not men sent by her stepfather. Alexander folded his arms. "Explain." The rider hesitated. "We were ordered to return Lady Ashford to her family." "By whom?" "Lord Ashford, my lord." Alexander's jaw tightened. Not dramatically. Just enough for Evelyn to notice. "Did he mention she was now a married woman?" The rider looked uncomfortable. "No, my lord." "Interesting." Another silence. Then Alexander took one step forward. Just one. The rider immediately looked ready to faint. "You may return." "My lord, you heard me." The rider nodded so quickly it was almost painful. "Yes, my lord." Within moments, the men were mounting their horses again. No arguments, no threats, no resistance. They simply turned around and left. Evelyn watched them disappear down the road. Then she slowly turned toward Alexander. What was that? Alexander looked at her. What was what? She stared. What was what? Yes, the armed men. Ah, the men who looked terrified. Reasonable reaction. Reasonable reaction to what? His expression remained annoyingly calm. Many people dislike conflict, Evelyn nearly screamed. Alexander, yes? Who are you? For the first time since meeting him, he looked genuinely amused. You married me without asking that question. I assumed you were a normal person, his eyebrow lifted. A dangerous assumption. She hated that he had a point. Before she could continue, a carriage rolled into the village square. Not an ordinary carriage. An enormous black carriage decorated with royal insignia. The crowd immediately stepped aside. Shopkeepers bowed. Villagers lowered their heads. The carriage door opened. 4 uniformed guards emerged. Then a silver-haired gentleman climbed out. The moment he saw Alexander, he hurried forward. Actually hurried. The man looked old enough to be a respected noble. Yet he approached Alexander like a nervous employee, reporting to a demanding employer. My lord. Alexander pinched the bridge of his nose. You found me. Your Grace. The entire capital has been searching for you. Evelyn froze. Your Grace. The words echoed inside her head. No, impossible. There were many dukes in England. Plenty of noblemen carried titles. But something about the old man's expression made her stomach tighten. Alexander closed his eyes briefly, as if he knew exactly what was about to happen. The old gentleman finally noticed Evelyn. His eyes widened, then widened even more. My God. Alexander muttered something under his breath. The old man looked back and forth between them. Your Grace. No. But no. The old gentleman looked like a man trying not to explode. Your Grace, are you telling me that while the kingdom has been searching for you, you secretly married someone? The entire village square went silent. A woman dropped a basket of apples. Someone's jaw literally fell open. Evelyn felt her heart stop. Secretly married. Your Grace. The pieces finally slammed together. No. The word escaped her lips. Alexander looked at her. Evelyn, no. She took a step back. Then another. No. The old gentleman looked confused. Alexander looked resigned, which somehow made it worse. Neither man answered. They didn't need to. Evelyn already knew. Every child in England knew. Every noble knew. Every servant knew. The Grand Duke, commander of the Crown's armies, the wealthiest man in the kingdom, the most powerful noble alive, Alexander Blackwood, the man people called the Iron Duke, the man she had paid 10 silver coins to marry her. The world tilted. Oh no, the old gentleman coughed awkwardly. That is generally the reaction. Evelyn turned and walked away. Not because she had a plan. Not because she knew where she was going. Because her brain had stopped functioning. She passed a bakery, a fountain, 3 confused villagers. Eventually she reached a quiet road outside town. Then she sat on a stone wall and laughed. The sound startled even her. Because what else could she do? She had run away from one nobleman, only to accidentally marry the most powerful nobleman in England. It was absurd, impossible, ridiculous. A few moments later, footsteps approached. Alexander, of course. He stopped several feet away, giving her space. Smart man. Neither spoke. Finally, Evelyn looked up. Did you know? Yes. She nodded. At least he was honest. You knew who you were. That is generally how identity works. Despite everything, a laugh escaped her. Alexander smiled slightly. The first genuine smile she had ever seen from him, and suddenly she understood why people followed him. It wasn't his title. It wasn't his wealth. It was presence, the kind of quiet confidence that couldn't be purchased, the kind that made people feel safe or terrified. Depending on which side they stood, you could have told me. I could have. Why didn't you? His answer came immediately. Because you weren't interested. Evelyn frowned. What? When you approached me, you didn't care about rank. He sat beside her. You didn't care about money. Another pause. You didn't even ask my family name. She hadn't. Not once. Alexander looked toward the horizon. Do you know how rare that is? For a moment neither spoke. Then Evelyn asked the question that mattered. What happens now? The humor vanished from his face. Immediately. We have a problem. Her stomach dropped. A powerful man saying we have a problem was never encouraging. What kind of problem? Your stepfather. Oh, unfortunately, she sighed. Of course, Alexander continued. The marriage contract with Hawthorne wasn't merely social. Evelyn frowned. What does that mean? It means money changed hands. The realization hit instantly. Oh, exactly. Lord Hawthorne hadn't simply arranged a marriage. He had purchased one, a transaction, an investment, a business deal, and now that investment had disappeared. Powerful men rarely accepted losing money gracefully, especially men like Hawthorne. Alexander stood. "We need to leave." "Leave?" "Immediately." "Why?" Before he could answer, hoofbeats echoed in the distance. Fast. Many of them, far more than before. Alexander's expression darkened. That was all the answer she needed. "How many?" He listened carefully, then exhaled. "Too many." The riders appeared moments later. Not 10, not 20, dozens. Some carried rifles. Others carried swords. At their center rode a familiar figure, Lord Hawthorne, the man she had been promised to marry. Even from a distance, Evelyn felt sick. His eyes locked onto hers, then shifted toward Alexander. Hatred immediately replaced surprise. He knew exactly who Alexander was, which meant he understood exactly what stood between him and his prize. The riders spread out, forming a semicircle, blocking every escape route. Evelyn's pulse hammered. This wasn't about marriage anymore. This was about pride, humiliation, revenge. Lord Hawthorne raised his voice, returned the girl. Alexander didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't react. The older noble sneered. "You've interfered in private business." Alexander finally spoke. "No." The single word carried across the road. "I ended it." The atmosphere changed instantly. Dangerous, sharp, like the moment before lightning strikes. Lord Hawthorne's face twisted with rage. "You think your title protects you?" Alexander's eyes became ice. "No." A long pause. Then he added quietly, "I know it doesn't." And somehow that answer was far more frightening, because it sounded like a man who had spent his life handling threats. A man who wasn't relying on power, a man relying on himself. Lord Hawthorne drew his pistol. Gasps erupted. Several riders looked nervous. Even they knew this was madness. Pointing a weapon at the Grand Duke bordered on treason, but Hawthorne was too angry to care, too humiliated, too desperate. The pistol rose, directly toward Evelyn, not Alexander. Evelyn. Everything seemed to slow, the wind, the horses, the world. Then Hawthorne pulled the trigger. The gunshot exploded across the countryside. Evelyn never saw the bullet. One moment, Lord Hawthorne's finger tightened on the trigger. The next, Alexander was in front of her. The impact struck his shoulder. The force spun him sideways. Several horses reared. Women screamed. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. For one terrible second, Evelyn couldn't breathe. Alexander. The world narrowed to a single point. Blood. There was blood on his coat. Too much blood. Far too much. Rage flashed across the faces of Hawthorne's own riders. Several immediately backed their horses away. One crossed himself. Another whispered a prayer. Because everyone understood what had just happened. Lord Hawthorne hadn't merely fired a weapon. He had shot the Grand Duke, a man trusted by the crown, a man beloved by soldiers, a man whose influence stretched across the entire kingdom. Even Hawthorne seemed to realize it. The fury drained from his face, leaving only shock, as though he couldn't believe what he had done. Alexander slowly straightened, then looked at the blood staining his sleeve. His expression remained calm, almost disappointingly calm. Evelyn stared. "You've been shot." "I noticed. You've been shot." "Yes." "Alexander," he sighed. "Still yes." The absurdity nearly made her cry. How was he standing? How was he talking? How was he acting as though this were a minor inconvenience? One of Hawthorne's men suddenly shouted, "Royal cavalry!" Everyone turned. Dust clouds appeared on the horizon, fast approaching, very fast. The ground itself seemed to tremble. Within moments, hundreds of mounted soldiers emerged. Royal banners snapped in the wind. Elite cavalry. The king's cavalry. Their commander rode at the front. The moment he spotted Alexander, his face darkened, then he noticed the blood, and everything changed. The officer's expression became terrifying. He pointed directly at Hawthorne. "Arrest him." Panic erupted. Several riders immediately surrendered. Others attempted to flee. None succeeded. Within minutes, the confrontation was over. Lord Hawthorne was dragged from his horse in chains. His face had gone gray. For the first time since Evelyn had known of him, he looked small, pathetic, powerless. As soldiers secured the prisoners, Alexander finally sat down. Evelyn rushed to his side. The physician arrived moments later. After examining the wound, he looked relieved. The bullet passed through the upper shoulder. Evelyn nearly collapsed from relief. He's going to live? The physician blinked. Live? He looked at Alexander, unless he planned something dramatic. Alexander looked mildly offended. I dislike drama. Several soldiers immediately coughed to hide their laughter. Evelyn shook her head. The man had been shot, and somehow everyone around him remained calm. Perhaps that was the true measure of leadership. Not the absence of danger, but the confidence people felt and were present. The following weeks passed in a blur. News spread quickly, then faster, then impossibly fast. By the time Evelyn reached London, everyone knew some version of the story. Some versions claimed she had saved the Grand Duke. Others claimed she was a foreign princess. One newspaper suggested she was secretly a spy. That article became Alexander's favorite. Unfortunately, reality was far less entertaining. Reality involved investigations, court proceedings, political consequences, and one very angry king, which finally brought Evelyn to the moment where our story began. 3 months later, the Royal Winter Ball, the largest gathering of nobility in the kingdom, the same ballroom, the same chandeliers, the same crowd, the same fear twisting inside her stomach, sees her. The king's command echoed across the room. Gasps erupted. Guards moved forward, exactly as they had at the beginning of our story. Only now we understand why. Evelyn stood frozen. Alexander stood beside her. Neither moved. The captain of the guard approached, then stopped. The tension became unbearable. Nobles whispered nervously. Everyone expected disaster. Everyone expected punishment. Everyone expected scandal. The king rose from his throne. His expression remained stern. Lady Evelyn Ashford. Evelyn swallowed. Your Majesty, you deceived the crown. The room fell silent. The king continued. You entered a legal marriage with the Grand Duke under false circumstances. More whispers, more tension, more anticipation. Then the king added, you also accidentally exposed a criminal conspiracy involving fraud, coercion, extortion, and attempted murder. The crowd blinked. Several nobles looked confused. The king wasn't finished. Furthermore, your actions revealed corruption among several members of the aristocracy. A pause, an embarrassed Lord Hawthorne before the entire kingdom. A few guests struggled not to smile. The king noticed. So did I. Laughter erupted. Suddenly, unexpectedly, the entire room changed. The tension cracked. Relief spread through the crowd. The king's stern expression finally softened. Lady Evelyn, your methods were unconventional. Another pause. Extremely unconventional. Even Alexander looked amused. The king shook his head. But the crown owes you a debt. Evelyn stared. Surely she had misheard. The king stepped forward, then addressed the ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen. The room became silent once more. I would like to formally recognize the woman brave enough to do something half the kingdom wished they could do. Curiosity spread instantly. The king smiled. She ignored rank. The crowd chuckled. She ignored wealth. More laughter, and she accidentally hired the Grand Duke as an actor. The ballroom exploded. Even the guards laughed. Alexander closed his eyes briefly. Evelyn wanted the floor to swallow her whole. The king wasn't finished. Do you know what makes this remarkable? Nobody answered. Every ambitious family in England spent years trying to arrange a marriage with him. The king's grin widened. She succeeded in one afternoon with 10 silver coins. The laughter became deafening. For the first time in months, Evelyn laughed too. Really laughed. The kind of laughter that comes after surviving something impossible. When the room finally settled, the king raised his hand. His voice became serious again. One final matter. The crowd quieted. Alexander straightened slightly. The king looked directly at him. Grand Duke Alexander Blackwood, Your Majesty, do you consider this marriage valid? The room held its breath. Because this was the real question. Not politics, not law, not scandal. The marriage, the accidental marriage, the marriage that had started everything. Alexander turned toward Evelyn. For a moment, the ballroom disappeared. The crowd disappeared. The kingdom disappeared. There was only him, only her, only the answer. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but everyone heard it, yes. 1,000 emotions crashed through Evelyn at once. Relief, happiness, disbelief, hope. The king nodded, then turned toward Evelyn. And you? Her heart pounded. Months earlier, she had approached a stranger because she was terrified. Terrified of losing her future. terrified of losing herself. Now she faced a different choice, not one forced by family, not one purchased by money, not one controlled by obligation, a choice that belonged entirely to her, perhaps for the first time in her life. She looked at Alexander, the man who had protected her, believed her, respected her, the man who had never treated her as property, never treated her as a transaction, never treated her as anything less than an equal. And suddenly the answer became very easy. Yes. The ballroom erupted into applause. Cheers echoed through the hall. The king smiled, Alexander smiled, and Evelyn realized something important. The story had never been about escaping a marriage. It had been about finding freedom. Because real love isn't built on pressure. It isn't built on fear. It isn't built on status. Real love begins with choice. The choice to stay. The choice to trust. The choice to build a future together. Sometimes life changes because of careful planning. Sometimes it changes because of courage. And sometimes it changes because a desperate woman walks into a tavern and asks a stranger to pretend to be her husband. Years later, people would still tell the story. The woman who accidentally married the Grand Duke. Most versions got the details wrong. Some exaggerated. Others invented entire adventures. But one part always remained true. The best things in life often arrive when we're running from something, only to discover we're actually running toward where we were meant to be all along. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. What would you have done if you discovered the stranger you hired was secretly the most powerful man in the kingdom? And remember, sometimes one brave decision can change your entire life.
What started as a desperate lie became a love story that changed an entire kingdom. If this story kept you hooked, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next dramatic romance. And tell me in the comments, at what moment did you realize Alexander was an ordinary stranger